my life has always been structured around data and predictability. As a high-level data scientist, my world is built on algorithms, precise risk assessment, and minimizing deviation. My younger brother, Marcus, however, exists as a perpetual statistical anomaly, a magnet for poor decisions, financial instability, and an inherent belief that the world, and specifically I, owe him a soft landing. I am 4 years his senior. While I was building my career and portfolio, Marcus was cycling through retail jobs, disruptive startups that failed 6 months in, and accumulating debts that would make a loan shark blush. For years, I covered his emergencies, paid his deposits, and bailed him out of situations that only existed because he refused to adhere to the most basic budgeting principles. 5 years ago, I purchased a beautiful, modest 3-bedroom house, let's call it the Cedar Cottage, with the intention of turning it into a rentable asset or, eventually, a professional home office. It was a strategic acquisition, and I planned meticulously for its future. It was exactly at this time that Marcus had burned his last bridge, having been evicted from his apartment after refusing to pay utility bills for 8 months. He called me, weeping, talking about sleeping in his car. Against the better judgment of my financial advisor, and my own gut instinct, I offered Marcus a lifeline that was more of a flotation device than he deserved. "Look, Marcus," I told him, standing in the empty Cedar Cottage living room, "I need this house to be maintained. I need someone on site. You can live here, rent-free, for the time being. The deal is simple: you pay the utilities, power, water, gas, internet. That's it. You don't pay me a dime in rent. But you keep the place immaculate, and you understand this arrangement is temporary and subject to review." He hugged me, promising the earth. He cried genuine tears of relief and vowed he would finally get his life together. For 5 years, I upheld my end of the bargain. 5 years of market rate rent I forwent. Conservatively, that was $250,000 in financial aid, not counting the property taxes and insurance I continued to cover. The immediate relief wore off quickly, replaced by a deep-seated, simmering resentment. Marcus didn't view this arrangement as an act of generosity, he saw it as an obligation fulfilled. He began to treat the cottage not as a temporary refuge but as his permanent inheritance. He became possessive. When I suggested selling the property 3 years in, the market was favorable, and I needed to consolidate capital, he exploded. "Are you serious, Elias? After all this time, you just kicked me to the curb? This is my home now. I've put my blood and sweat into this place." He had, in fact, changed one light bulb and occasionally mowed the front lawn. "You don't even use it. You just hold on to it for spite. You have everything, Elias. The least you can do is let me have this one thing." I bit back my response, recognizing that arguing with Marcus was like arguing with a toddler over bedtime. Logic had no place. I backed down, shelving the sale just to preserve the semblance of familial peace. The real catalyst for the disaster came 18 months ago when I accepted a massive data modeling contract based in Singapore. It was a lucrative 2-year engagement that required me to be physically present. Before I left, I tied up every loose end. I was meticulous. Except for one thing, the limited power of attorney, POA. A year before I left, I had granted Marcus a very restricted POA, allowing him to sign off on emergency repairs, like a burst pipe, in case I was unreachable on a flight or in a meeting. It was a measure of convenience and trust. I never imagined he would use it for anything other than its stated, narrow purpose. Life in Singapore was demanding but rewarding. I had outsourced the management of my main investment properties to a firm, but the Cedar Cottage, because Marcus was living there, remained under my direct, if remote, supervision. Or so I thought. A few weeks ago, I was settling into a late-night session, analyzing performance metrics, when I decided to review my U.S. banking accounts. I had a consolidated portal that linked my various investment and savings accounts, including the specific account designated for the Cedar Cottage's property taxes and insurance. I clicked on the linked mortgage account for the cottage. Since the property was fully paid off 3 years prior, the balance should have been zero. My heart immediately slammed against my ribs. The balance field read, $287,500. I stared at the screen, blinking rapidly, convinced it was a typo, a glitch in the mainframe. I clicked the transaction history. On the liability side, under recent activity, there was an entry dated 6 months prior, home equity line of credit, HELOC, origination. The amount matched the balance. Then, immediately below it, HELOC disbursement, full amount drawn. The money was gone. My analytical mind shut down, replaced by a cold, searing panic. How was this possible? I had secured the title and the mortgage documents myself. I had never signed any HELOC application. I immediately flagged the activity with the bank's fraud department, initiating an emergency freeze. They asked me to wait while they retrieved the origination file. The next day, a thick PDF landed in my secure inbox. It was the loan document package, complete with the bank representative's notes, the closing statement, and the proof of identity. I scrolled through the pages until I reached the signature line. There, scrawled in a shaky, almost childish hand, was my name, Elias, and next to it, the critical, damning proof of how this horror was executed, a professionally prepared document labeled Limited Power of Attorney Utilization Form, citing the POA I had given him for emergency repairs. Marcus hadn't just signed my name. He had forged official documents detailing property income that didn't exist, inflating my U.S. assets to meet the bank's approval criteria, all while using the limited POA as the key to unlock the $250,000 vault. The bank's internal investigation notes confirmed my worst fear. The funds had been withdrawn in a series of large, sequential cashier's checks over 3 weeks. Marcus had drained the entire line of credit and effectively mortgaged my house to its absolute limit. I didn't need any more confirmation. That meticulous $287,500 debt was his confession. But the final, crushing blow came via FedEx, an email copy forwarded to my old U.S. address. It was a legal notice, stark and unforgiving, sent by the bank because Marcus had already missed the first 3 monthly interest payments. It was a notice of default. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings on the Cedar Cottage. My generous gift, my 5 years of financial sacrifice, my trust, and my meticulous planning all wiped out by my entitled brother in a single, criminal act of grand theft and forgery. I closed my laptop, the Singapore skyline blurred through the rage that instantly consumed me. Marcus had attempted to steal my property and saddle me with his debt, all while believing he was simply taking what he was owed. He had just ended the generosity. Now, the algorithm of consequence would begin. And I was going to calculate his future down to the last decimal point. The rage was pure, blinding, and fundamentally illogical, a statistical deviation I could not permit. Marcus's attempt to steal $287,500, coupled with the pending foreclosure, threatened the integrity of my entire portfolio and my reputation for perfect risk management. I needed to move from emotional response to cold, calculated action. I took 3 deep breaths, forcing my analytical mind back online. The first priority was stabilization. I could not allow the Cedar Cottage to be foreclosed upon. Not because I cared about the house itself anymore, but because a foreclosure would complicate the inevitable legal warfare by introducing a third party, the bank, as the victim, potentially muddying the criminal evidence trail. Within the hour, I had transferred funds sufficient to cover the 3 missed interest payments and a penalty fee into the mortgage account, effectively halting the foreclosure process without settling the principal debt. I noted the expenditure as legal risk mitigation, phase alpha. Marcus would remain unaware that the bank's immediate pressure had been relieved. Next came the gray rock strategy. I needed Marcus to feel safe, lazy, and utterly convinced that his monstrous scheme had succeeded. Any sign of panic from me, any accusation, and he would either disappear or, worse, destroy whatever lingering evidence of his spending remained. I composed a short, innocuous email, formatted to appear as if I had sent it during a quick coffee break between meetings. Subject, checking in Marcus, how are things at the cottage? Still busy with work here, weather is terrible. Hope all is well. You keeping up with the utilities? Talk soon. The response was immediate and annoyingly cheerful. Hey Elias. All good here. House is great. Utilities paid up. Don't worry about a thing. Stay warm, man. The casual, patronizing nature of his reply solidified the cold knot in my stomach. He genuinely believed he had one. He believed I was stupid, too busy in Asia to notice the $250,000 hole in my assets. For the next week, while maintaining the fiction of an impossibly busy data scientist thousands of miles away, I initiated phase beta, data acquisition. Being physically remote was a tactical disadvantage, but in the modern age, money translates into immediate, highly effective boots on the ground. I hired 2 distinct professionals in the US. First, a forensic accountant specializing in complex fraud cases. Her task was simple: trace the complete flow of the $287,500. She secured subpoenas and began investigating the recipient accounts of those cashier's checks. Second, a private investigations firm. Their initial task was surveillance on Marcus, confirming his location and habits, but the secondary, more critical task was evidence preservation. I provided them with photos of the Cedar Cottage's interior and a list of key items: the old documents drawer where the original limited POA was kept, the desk Marcus used, and confirmation of any new, high-value assets that had mysteriously appeared: cars, electronics, etc. The preliminary reports trickled in over encrypted channels. The Helix funds had vanished with astonishing speed. The forensic accountant confirmed Marcus hadn't invested the money or tried to start another failed business, he had simply indulged. Massive gambling debt payments, luxury vehicle leases, paid 6 months upfront, expensive electronics, high-end travel bookings, and, most damningly, a transfer of nearly $40,000 into an account held by a former girlfriend, listed with the vague memo, investment partnership payoff. He hadn't even had the foresight to move the funds offshore or hide them in layered accounts. He treated the stolen money like sudden, infinite disposable income. This confirmed my initial assessment: Marcus wasn't a criminal mastermind, he was merely an entitled, impulsive thief. My PI provided photographs of a new high-definition television the size of a small car, delivered to the Cedar Cottage, along with pictures of a shiny, leased sports coupe parked carelessly in the driveway, the exact vehicle detailed in one of the Helix disbursement records. The images were invaluable. Simultaneously, I worked with my U.S. attorney, assembling the legal dossier. The attack had to be comprehensive and overwhelming, designed not for settlement, but for devastation. We isolated 2 distinct lines of attack: 1, the criminal complaint, filing immediate charges with the district attorney's office for forgery, identity theft, and grand theft over $100,000. Marcus had used a fraudulent statement of my income and forged my signature, all while abusing a legal instrument, the limited POA. The bank was already cooperative due to the fraud component, and the paper trail was ironclad. 2, the civil suit, the debt equation. This was the mechanism for guaranteed perpetual bankruptcy. The suit would demand, full repayment of the $287,500 Helix principal. All legal and investigative costs incurred. Punitive damages for fraud and emotional distress. And, the masterstroke, retroactive, market rate rent for the 5 years he had lived in the Cedar Cottage rent-free. My attorney calculated this to be nearly $260,000, including interest. The total civil debt I was preparing to levy against Marcus exceeded $600,000. This guaranteed that even after selling all his assets, declaring bankruptcy, and facing inevitable wage garnishment, he would carry this debt, legally tethered to me, for the rest of his functional life. The felony conviction would ensure he would never again hold a job requiring a clean background check. The algorithm of consequence was finalizing its parameters. All that remained was the execution. I secured my resignation from the Singapore contract, a calculated financial loss, to ensure I could oversee the final phases of my brother's demise in person. I booked a one-way flight home. I kept Marcus apprised of my travel plans via email, ensuring he believed I was returning to settle into my life and, perhaps, finally sell the cottage. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him unsuspecting. I wanted him to be sitting on his oversized, stolen sofa, watching his stolen television, when the knock came at the door. I wanted the look of sheer, agonizing betrayal when he realized the kind older brother who had given him a 5-year reprieve was now the executor of his permanent destruction. I didn't owe him a soft landing anymore. I owed him data, a precise calculation of zero net worth, 0 job prospects, and 30 years of unpayable debt. And I was delivering. The flight from Singapore felt less like travel and more like a tactical deployment. I landed in the US late Tuesday night, bypassing any direct route to the Cedar Cottage. Marcus was expecting me to turn up on his doorstep, perhaps with some takeout and tales of Asian weather. Instead, I established a temporary operational base in a sterile, anonymous corporate apartment downtown, allowing my surveillance team to maintain eyes on the target property without alerting him to my presence. The true work began immediately on Wednesday morning. My first priority was meeting with my attorney, Mr. Davies, and the forensic accountant, Dr. Chen. Mr. Davies was a man who understood the value of absolute overkill. We reviewed the final legal packages. The documentation for the criminal complaint was devastatingly clear: the Helic origination documents, the forged income statements, which Marcus had prepared using outdated payroll templates from my old company, and the clear misuse of the limited power of attorney, a key document that explicitly forbade the execution of debt instruments. The district attorney's office is ready to file for the warrant this afternoon, Elias, Mr. Davies confirmed, pushing a stack of sealed documents across the table. Forgery over $100,000 and grand theft are serious felonies here. The evidence is conclusive. He will be arrested and processed immediately. Dr. Chen then presented the final data on the disbursement of the $287,500. It read like the ledger of a drunken sailor. There are no complex offshore accounts, Elias, Dr. Chen stated, pointing to a graph showing rapid dissipation. It appears Marcus made three major moves: paid off high-interest personal debt from prior failed ventures, the down payment/lease on the luxury vehicle, and a substantial transfer listed as investment that went straight into a third party's checking account. The rest was vaporized on high-end consumer goods, entertainment, and, frankly, trivial expenditures. Excellent, I said, feeling a cold satisfaction. Every penny traceable, every choice documented. Next, we finalized the civil suit. The total cumulative debt load against Marcus now stood just over $630,000, factoring in the Helic principal, the legal fees, the punitive damages, and, most crucially, the $260,000 in retroactive market rate rent for the 5 years of free housing. Serving him during the arrest is legally sound and tactically efficient, Mr. Davies advised. It ensures the process server doesn't need to track him down later, and it maximizes the psychological impact. He will be served the civil complaint while he's being detained, right before they book him. I nodded, approving the final algorithm of destruction. The execution would be surgical and simultaneous. The only remaining task was luring Marcus into a known location at a predetermined time. I wanted him in the Cedar Cottage, surrounded by the physical trophies of his theft. I waited until Thursday afternoon, ensuring the arrest warrant was secured and the police contact was confirmed. Then, I called Marcus. He answered on the third ring, his voice breezy and relaxed. Elias. Back in the States? Should have told me, man. Did you finally get sick of the humidity? Something like that, Marcus, I kept my tone level, almost bored. I need to come by the cottage tomorrow afternoon. I need to pick up some files and talk about the long-term plan for the house. This was the hook. The long-term plan usually meant me caving to his desires, or at least discussing a compromise. Yeah, sure, come on over, he replied, the entitlement thick in his voice. I was going to suggest we get dinner, but honestly, I've got that new massive TV, the one I just got for the living room, and the Celtics game is on. Why don't you just swing by? We can order a pizza and chill. You look exhausted, Elias, you should probably relax a little. He believed he was doing me a favor by letting me into my own, mortgaged house. He was relaxed, anchored by the security of his perceived victory. Perfect, I said. How about 4:30 p.m. tomorrow, Friday? Gives us time to talk before the game starts. Sounds good, buddy. See you then. He hung up without saying goodbye. I immediately notified the police task force and the process server. Execution time, Friday, 4:30 p.m. I spent the next 24 hours reviewing the documentation one last time. This wasn't revenge, I told myself. Revenge implied emotional chaos. This was correction. Marcus had introduced a massive systemic risk into my life through fraud, and I was responding with a proportional, calculated countermeasure designed to ensure that the risk was permanently mitigated. He had enjoyed 5 years of grace, a statistical outlier in his life of failures. Now, he would face the certainty of mathematics. On Friday afternoon, I drove a rental car to a commercial block 2 miles from the Cedar Cottage. I pulled up to a coffee shop and waited. The surveillance team confirmed Marcus was inside, probably anticipating his pizza and game night. The leased sports coupe was parked conspicuously in the driveway. At 4:25 p.m., I saw the unmarked vehicles pull onto the street adjacent to the cottage. I put my phone on silent, watching the minute hand tick towards the agreed time. I would not be going inside. My role was not spectacle, it was initiation. I needed Marcus to realize the gravity of his situation immediately, without the distraction of my presence. At exactly 4:30 p.m., the door of the Cedar Cottage burst open, though I couldn't see the action from my vantage point. A minute later, my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Davies's paralegal, warrant executed. Subject secured. Process server confirms civil documents were served on the pavement. The clock is running, Elias. I leaned back in the driver's seat. Marcus's future, once a chaotic, unpredictable variable, had just been reduced to a simple, unpayable equation. The long, agonizing campaign of consequences had begun. I did not witness the physical arrest. I didn't need the spectacle. I needed the certainty. Once Mr. Davies' paralegal confirmed the execution, Marcus secured, the civil suit documents served on the pavement outside the very house he tried to steal, I drove back to my corporate apartment. The satisfaction was not warm, it was the cold, sterile feeling of a complex calculation reaching its predetermined conclusion. The next 48 hours were reserved for silence. The data of Marcus's panic quickly began to flood my phone. He started with texts late Friday evening, filtered through my spam settings but logged by my attorney, Elias, what the hell is going on? They took me. I don't understand. Call me. Saturday morning brought more frantic calls, followed by desperate emails. He had been bailed out, likely by exhausting his remaining liquid cash or borrowing against the recently acquired, and soon-to-be seized, assets. He was back in the Cedar Cottage, surrounded by the physical evidence of his crime, the oversized TV, the leased sports coupe in the driveway, but now shackled by a felony charge and a massive civil lawsuit. He still didn't grasp the nature of the attack. He thought this was a misunderstanding, a cruel overreaction that a simple phone call could fix. I waited until Saturday afternoon. I needed the fear to curdle into true existential dread. I called him from an untraceable VoIP line. I allowed the phone to ring once before picking up. Elias. Marcus's voice was ragged, stripped of its usual bravado. Thank God. What did you do? Why did you call the police? It was just the bank. I can explain the helic, I was going to pay it back. Stop, I interrupted, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. There is nothing to explain. There is only accounting. Accounting? They said I committed grand theft. And fraud. Elias, I'm your brother. You can't let them do this to me. You have to talk to the bank. The bank is irrelevant now, Marcus. They are simply a third party I had to pay off to protect the asset. You signed an unsecured document using forged income statements and abused a limited power of attorney to steal $287,500. That is not a misunderstanding. That is criminal fraud. The immediate shock of hearing the figure out loud silenced him for a moment. I was entitled to it, he suddenly screamed, the panic giving way to the toxic entitlement that had started this entire catastrophe. I lived there for 5 years, Elias. Rent-free. You owe me. I needed the money, and you had it. You don't use that house. That belief, Marcus, is the terminal diagnosis of your future, I stated clinically. You misunderstood generosity as entitlement. You thought the 5 years of free housing was owed, when it was merely a temporary, revocable arrangement. Now, we are correcting the ledger. I then delivered the true, final equation of his doom. You were served with the civil complaint yesterday. You will be facing not only the criminal charges for forgery and grand theft, but also a civil judgment. The suit demands repayment of the $287,500 HELOC principal, all legal and investigative costs, and punitive damages. That totals approximately $370,000. That money is recoverable via the eventual sale of the Cedar Cottage, once I clear the title and recover ownership. He gasped, seemingly calculating that if the house was sold, the debt would disappear. But the primary function of the civil suit is this, I continued, ensuring every word resonated. It demands 5 years of retroactive market rate rent. We calculated the market average for those 5 years, plus statutory interest. That figure, Marcus, is $260,000. Silence descended on the line, heavy and absolute. Marcus finally understood. The two numbers, $370,000 and $260,000, added up to the inescapable debt I had engineered. The grand total of the civil judgment against you is over $630,000, I finished. You will be held liable for every penny of it, even after you file for bankruptcy, which you inevitably will. The debt is secured through a civil judgment for fraud, meaning it is non-dischargeable. This guarantees you perpetual, lifelong indebtedness. Elias, you can't, he whispered, the entitlement broken. You can't ruin my life over a house. I'm going to prison. The sentencing for felony fraud is out of my hands, Marcus. That is the function of the state. But the financial ruin? That is the proportional countermeasure for the systemic risk you introduced into my life. The luxury car, the massive television, and every other asset purchased with the $287,500 you stole are all now documented collateral in the civil suit. They will be seized and sold. I'll pay it back, I'll get a job, I swear, he began to plead. Your ability to acquire assets or secure employment requiring a clean background check has been permanently eliminated by the felony filing, Marcus. You no longer have the capacity to repay the debt, which is precisely the point. You chose to burn down 5 years of my generosity and steal from me. I have responded by ensuring that you will never be in a position to steal from anyone, ever again. I heard the sound of something breaking on his end, perhaps the new television or just his composure. It was a shattering, animal sound of complete defeat. This is not a negotiation. This is not a conversation. This is the conclusion of the data set, I stated, my tone unwavering. The next time you hear from me, it will be through my attorneys, who will be collecting on the civil judgment for the rest of your functional life. Consider this my permanent exit from your life and your problems. I waited a second longer, ensuring he fully absorbed the finality, and then, I pressed the end call button. I deleted the VoIP app and closed the file. The calculation was complete. Marcus's future had been zeroed out, guaranteed by the mathematics of debt and consequence. The integrity of my portfolio, and my peace of mind, were finally restored. 2 years have passed since I executed the algorithm of consequence. The data suggests an undeniable success rate, my life is stabilized, and Marcus's risk factor has been permanently mitigated. The chaos he introduced into my perfect system has been expunged, replaced by the clean, predictable certainty of a legal judgment. The initial steps were swift. The Cedar Cottage, the epicenter of the fraud, was recovered without complication. Once the bank accepted my full repayment of the overdue interest, I secured the title against any future action. The property was quickly listed and sold. The proceeds, along with the collateral seized, the leased sports coupe, the oversized television, and other high-value electronics purchased with the HELOC money, were used to pay down the principal of the fraudulent $287,500 debt and cover my extensive legal and investigative costs. My portfolio integrity was fully restored. The criminal proceedings were equally decisive. Faced with irrefutable evidence, the forged documents, the bank's swift cooperation, and the clear misuse of the limited power of attorney, Marcus had no defense. My attorney ensured the district attorney was aware that Marcus's actions constituted high-level fraud against his own family, painting a clear picture of calculated financial predation. Marcus accepted a plea deal, serving 10 months in a minimum security facility for felony forgery and grand theft. The time served was secondary, the resulting permanent felony record was the true goal. But the real mechanism of his future zeroing was the civil judgment. The The $630,000 figure, comprising the Helic repayment, the punitive damages, and, most cruelly, the $260,000 of retroactive market rate rent, was affirmed by the court. Marcus, upon his release, predictably filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. As planned, because the debt was explicitly secured through a judgment of fraud, it was declared non-dischargeable. He is now perpetually financially tethered to me. I receive quarterly reports from my accounting firm detailing the collection efforts. Marcus's felony record guarantees he cannot hold any job requiring financial trust or a clean background check. He cycles through sporadic, low-wage labor, stocking shelves, cleaning crews, always moving, always trying to stay ahead of the garnishment. It doesn't work. My legal team intercepts the maximum allowable percentage of his wages. I have been informed he is currently couch surfing, unable to secure a proper lease, living in an environment of perpetual financial instability. Every few months, my bank account is credited with a paltry sum, perhaps $400, perhaps $700, a tangible reminder that the algorithm of consequence is still running, calculating and collecting on a debt that can never be fully repaid. The irony is not lost on me. The debt collection process he now endures is far more stressful, pervasive, and financially crippling than the original utility payments he had refused to cover at the Cedar Cottage. He traded 5 years of stability for a lifetime of calculated ruin. I have not spoken to Marcus since that final, shattering phone call. I blocked his number and email addresses. I moved my operational base away from the US entirely, accepting a new, long-term contract in Zurich. The geographic distance reinforces the finality of the boundary I drew. There is no regret, only the cold satisfaction of professional correction. I gave Marcus every statistical chance at success. He responded by attempting to steal $287,500 and saddle me with a massive financial risk. I responded with proportionality, ensuring that he will never again be in a position to introduce that risk into my life, or anyone else's. My world remains built on algorithms, precise risk assessment, and predictability. And Marcus's future, thanks to my calculation, is perfectly, ruinously predictable, a guaranteed lifetime debtor, funded by the very generosity he chose to abuse. The account is settled.